G'day legends, I hope that you are having a fantastic day and have had a great weekend. Now, as you know, I missed yesterday's video upload. Well, I didn't even make a video. I had Lily's university graduation ball to go to, so congratulations to her, a great job, and we had a really good night. So today we're going to be talking about Ukraine, as you've seen from the title, and we have actually not too much to go over, but some definite interesting bits and pieces of news. Now, this main bit of news coming out is that the US Congress is still holding up that $60 billion that the administration wanted to get approved to Ukraine. Now, this is absolutely coming down to the wire, as the Congress, of course, will recess over the Christmas break, and Ukraine can't really afford that. Ukraine say that they're desperate for weapons, and soldiers in the Avdiivka front say that they are being starved of ammunition. Ukraine's First Lady has warned that Ukrainians are in mortal danger, and in an interview with BBC, she said, "If the world gets tired, they will simply let us die." And the situation is growing desperate, as we do see Russia make more and more territorial gains this week, which I'll show you on the map. But some of these territorial gains, even in the last 24 hours, have been very large, considering how slowly moving the front line has been for the last 12 months or more. And talking about, the money held up, all these movements, there is absolutely the overall feeling from the media, from social media, from friends, of that this isn't going well. And it's the most pessimistic that I've actually seen of all of this from the entire conflict, and a lot of doubts coming in. And that can spread like malignant cancer, and of course can affect morale absolutely everywhere, from just support online through to the soldiers then on the front line. And a good friend of mine who has done a lot of humanitarian aid and business in Ukraine has talked to me about what happens if the aid does get cut down to an insufficient level. Remember, it's not just some aid. Ukraine needs a level of aid to just continue. The consumable items, the items that can't be reused, everything from medical equipment, shells, bullets, whatever. There needs to be at least the baseline of that to maintain where the front line was. And then you need more to then try and move that frontline level. Like, what happens if the aid doesn't get approved to actually reach that level? That what will Ukraine actually do? Especially after it's promised the population and the world the complete liberation of all of its land, the oblasts, Crimea, everything. And now at the cost of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of lives. And him talking about, could this desperation lead to further acts of sabotage like we saw with the Nord Stream, and to try and push, NATO maybe into further involvement? What could we see when we see desperate acts like this, if it goes down that path? Because if a peace deal, ceasefire is requested, one, it will be unbelievably unpopular in Ukraine and for many supporting countries and people. And what will the soldiers feel about this? And not only the military, but these ideological militias, how will they actually react to this? Can Ukraine actually do that now, after these promises, after the cost of this war? Can that actually now happen without a complete toppling of governments? We don't know. It's just fully speculation. Him and I were talking back and forth about this, and is something like that still on the table? If support is decreasing and Russia see it decreasing, would they agree to something like this, or would they take advantage of it and try and complete at least maybe their initial goals? But we just sort of speculated about what would this actually look like. What would a win for Russia or a win for Ukraine, what would it actually look like there? And what happens if things really do going bad for Ukraine? And this was the concern for Russia, that if, Russia, everything started going really badly and ended up pushing into Russia, well, the desperation at the Kremlin could then we see nuclear weapons, that desperate times call for desperate measures. And this was his concern that we had a bit of a chat about. And we've seen Ukraine accuse Russia of weaponizing time. And to be honest, it does seem like that is working. The longer it goes on, people are getting war fatigue from this. And I believe even fatigue just of this constant asking for more, people get a bit over that when we're not seeing that actually translate into movements on the front line. Now, of course, I know that this is an incredibly complex issue, but I study this all the time. I'm not just your normal taxpayer voter who is seeing all of this, not seeing movement and going, well, why are we still supporting that? And what I will say, though, is as pessimistic as it may seem, Ukraine is definitely not out of this fight yet, like some will say. There's still a hell of a lot of EU backing. Of course, without the US aid, the EU backing is nowhere near enough. And of course, there's still some US aid to go through, and I'm sure that more will be approved. It's just going to go back. That 60 billion number will move somewhere. It's not going to move up, it'll move down, but I'm sure more aid will come. I'm certain it's not going to go to zero. And of course, some of that aid, which is approved, paid for, hasn't actually entered the country yet. And I think the biggest thing on Ukraine's side is it is a fight for the survival of their nation. And it does have a passionate population behind this who will resist Russia. But at the end of the day, without the weapons, without the aid, it's not going to have, a positive effect on the front line, no matter how passionate then the population are about regaining those territories. But the complete liberation of the occupied territories right now does seem fairly far-fetched, but we're unsure how the next month, next 6 months, next 12 months, next 2 years, we're unsure how that will actually unfold for both Russia and Ukraine. But many will speculate the longer this goes on, it falls more and more in favor of Moscow. And let's talk about Moscow for a little bit, because there has been, this trend of wanting to have a presidential election. And this presidential election, Moscow has announced it intends to include Crimea, parts of occupied Donetsk, Luhansk, and Zaporizhia, and Kherson Oblast in the upcoming Russian presidential elections, which will take place on March the 15th to the 17th in 2024. So next year, and that's coming around very, very quickly. What you need to remember is the 10th of March is my birthday. So, I don't know, put it in your calendars. I have no idea. But Ukraine's Ukraine's Ministry of Foreign Affairs has then released this statement about that happening. Statement of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine on the intentions of the Russian Federation to hold presidential elections in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. On December the 8th, the Central Election Commission of the Russian Federation announced the holding of the next presidential election on March 15. The Russian authorities announced their intention to organize voting in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, city of Sevastopol, parts of Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, Kherson regions of Ukraine. Of course, when they say parts of, some of these oblasts here, they're not completely occupied. Crimea, completely occupied, but there are areas, say Kherson, that is not completely occupied, although Russia may have annexed that by a vote. Doesn't make sense. Don't worry. Holding Russian elections on Ukrainian territories grossly violates the constitution and legislation of Ukraine, the norms and principles of international law, in particular the UN Charter. Such electoral process, like other similar propaganda activities in the past, will be null and void. So saying it won't actually matter what happens here. But of course, what this is trying to do is Russia is trying to take another step forward to try and legitimize the annexation of these areas and bring it into Russia, like we've seen in these areas, issuing passports to people, having votes, things like this. Anyway, inclusion of the votes cast in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine will question the legitimacy of the overall result of the election of the president of the Russian Federation. Currently, at the moment, Russian polls, take it as it is, Russian polls say that Putin has an above 80% approval rating, which is higher than even the pre-war. But you know how it is. If there's a grain of salt somewhere that's fucking this big, take it with that. We call on the international community to resolutely condemn Russia's intention to hold presidential elections in the occupied Ukrainian territories and to impose sanctions on those involved in their organisation and conduct. We also call on foreign countries not to send their citizens as observers to these pseudo-elections, those who partake will face criminal responsibility in line with the Ukrainian legislation. So I've thought a little bit about this because it's like, well, why would we not want observers there to observe if this is actually going correctly. But of course, if there are observers there, then you're going, well, then you're saying that this is legitimate. So that's, yeah, I thought like, well, that's bullshit, not wanting a third party there to observe it. But then, of course, if you start observing it, then it's going, well, you're observing this election, so then it must be legitimate. That's what they're getting at. Any election in Russia has nothing to do with democracy. They serve only as a tool to keep the Russian regime in power. And of course, in this, we see that the Putin is going to get voted in again. Now, Putin, across his time, has served 4 terms, but he served 2, then Medvedev came in, then 2 again. And in 2008, the term that a president sits went from 4 years now up to 6. Now, Russian presidents can only serve 2 consecutive terms. So Putin did 2. Medvedev came in 2008 to serve his 1. The day after he was elected, he appointed Putin as Russia's prime minister. So there's always been a lot of influence behind the scenes there. But of course, what Russia is trying to do is they're trying to bring in legitimacy to those areas as well. But one thing I will say, these areas, there's a hell of a lot of people in those areas who do want to be Russian, who see themselves as Russian. That's the reason we have the militia groups in there as well fighting against Ukraine. Yes, Russian backed, blah, blah, blah. I get that, but a lot of people there still see themselves as Russian. And yes, we've seen that in Ukraine as well. There are people who want to go that way. Is it the majority through all of Ukraine as a whole? No. Are there areas where it would be the majority? Yes. Now, speaking of elections, Ukraine has been criticized for not planning to hold its own presidential elections. Although due to martial law, which Ukraine extends for 90 days at a time, Ukraine actually isn't required to hold an election. Now, Zelensky has previously stated that elections would cost about $135 million. And when people were talking about elections, well, he said we'd need the US and EU to fund to hold these elections. He said, I told him, referring to Senator Lindsey Graham, if the US and Europe give us financial support, also saying, I'm sorry, I will not hold elections on credit. I will not take money from weapons and give it to elections either. So saying that money would have to come from somewhere that could be supporting the front line. If you give me the financial support, if the parliamentarians realise that we need to do this, then let's quickly change the legislation. Most importantly, let's take risks together. So, of course, they're saying that it would be a risk to do that. And from the polls, what I've seen talking to people, that a lot of Ukrainians don't see that there is a need currently to have an election. And, of course, with several million Ukrainians being out of the country into Europe or Australia or America, outside of Europe, outside of Ukraine, it would be very difficult to actually get all the results of that and actually have those people vote, especially with the amount that are then on the front line. But I do think too that there would be a bit of not wanting to have an election, and of course that's going to be a big distraction there. We don't know what the outcome of that would actually be until you go to the polls. We've had a vote very recently in Australia where people thought it was a sure thing, and it turn back the other way. So we're going to have a look at some stuff, then we're going to go over the maps. Now let's look at the MOD update. On the 5th of December 23, a Russian naval aviation Su-24 Mike Fencer D fighter bomber was highly likely shot down by Ukrainian surface-to-air missile SAM over the northwestern Black Sea in the vicinity of Ukraine's Snake Island. Since summer 23, Russia has continued to conduct high-risk crude strike missions against the island. This is likely mainly for messaging reasons, because the island has become a symbol of Ukrainian resistance and Russia wants to demonstrate it can project force across the Black Sea. I would say there's probably more surveillance, reconnaissance equipment on that island and repeaters that they're trying to target as well for communications and for running drones in the Black Sea for more, what's the word I'm looking for? Coverage there as well to repeat back signals. That's what I would say is probably there. The 2-man crew was likely lost. The location and operational conditions would make a successful Russian search and rescue mission extremely challenging. Both sides still suffer regular combat aircraft losses. Overall, air defenses continue to severely limit the effectiveness of tactical air operations, and this is not going to change when we see F-16s go in. Is Ukraine going to have a better capacity of aircraft? Yes. Are they going to have a better platform to launch more modern missiles off? Yes. Is it going to have a huge change in what they saw the effectiveness of tactical air operations? No. These SAMs whether it is a Western system, a Russian system, are very, very good. And we have seen F-16s shot down by older systems than Russia is operating there as well, by older Soviet systems too. So huge game changer, no. And like they say in that, these are going to be incredibly risky missions, of course, down here in the Black Sea. Of course, this is Snake Island over here. Now, what a lot of people are saying with the F-16s, they're going to be targeting Crimea and Kerch Bridge at this, but like they even point out, it's going to be incredibly risky for any air operation in here too. So also, these videos will also be on my Telegram, a lot with some other stuff if you want to come and join the rage at the Telegram. But Russia has shown that it has captured a Leopard 2A4 and as well as an M2 Bradley. So we're going to have a look at this as well. So this is the Leopard 2A4. Of course, this is one of the German tanks, main battle tanks, that has been delivered into Ukraine. So you can still hear that there is fighting going on in the background too, but that has been captured by the Russians. We know Russia is they are stockpiling some equipment for propaganda use, but of course we've seen use of armoured vehicles like this in museums, open-air museums for propaganda. This is what they've done with the Australian Bushmaster and stuff on display in Russia. That is no different to what Ukraine did with the Russian vehicles in Kiev and around the world actually as well. And this is the Bradley that has been captured. So the sand color on the bottom. Of course, these vehicles have been repainted like the Leopards, like the Abrams as well, that are showing up. Well, not the Leopards, but the Abrams from the desert tan, and what we traditionally see these into the sort of more woodland camo. So, of course, they've actually spoken about this in the F-16s too, that everything, of course, inside these vehicles is in English. That it's you need a very good understanding of English to be able to read this in critical times as well, and then operate these. So that sticks on over the outside, and of course we'll have, so really it'll be Ukrainian to read. The F-16, of course, they're saying is a fair bit more difficult than that. So the pilots going across to actually do that program, they are part of their training is like an extensive English course too.
Есть и такие пометки на украинском, поскольку боеприпасы двух цветов заряжающий написал маркером, чтобы не перепутать бронебойный черный, фугас желтый.
This is no different. Ammo has different colors depending on what it is.
Машина новая, лучше предыдущих версий.
Ну здесь, во-первых, динамическая защита сильнее, двигатель мощнее.
But of course, crawling over these looking for how the night vision equipment will work, the guidance system, all this in it. The vehicle itself isn't massively the concern, it will be more what's in it that gets captured. And we saw this as well with, I can't show you this. We saw this, of course, when Russia cruised into, up near Kyiv, that the amount of armor that got destroyed there, and typically your newer armor or guys that have got killed or taken prisoner with night fighting equipment, thermal equipment, that stuff was taken, was inspected, and we've seen even T-90 pop up in the US too, and they're going to be breaking that down, crawling over it, deconstructing, de-engineering that and going, okay, what actually is this? And of course, this is going to go the same way. People have this illusion that like Russian engineers are just, there with a hammer and a chisel, and that's just not true. That, this falling into Russia's hands can be a real problem, especially whatever thermal, night fighting and communications equipment is actually in these as well. Now, hopefully when these guys abandon these vehicles, if they were able to, zeroed all like the radios and everything, because that could be a huge problem. Any like military radios, you can press down and you can zero it all, and it basically just murders the radio. But we will, I guess we probably won't find out, but it is interesting. Now, on the maps, of course, we have Ukraine here, the capital of Kyiv. The red areas occupied since 22 and 14. And the purple since 14. I'm bloody all over the place. Here we have Romania, Poland, Belarus, and then Russia around here. Now, the first place we're going to go into is just Kherson Oblast, and we're going to come down into here, and this is Krinky. Now, Russia has launched a failed assault into Krinky, which we've seen by a lot of photographs, a lot of drone stuff, and I'll try and share that on Telegram as well, has taken huge casualties and was ambushed by artillery on the right side of the Dnipro here. So Ukrainian artillery ambushed as they pushed off this road to come into Krinky here. But what we don't see is any territorial loss or gain in Thankyou. So let's have a look over some then of this. We've got a little bit of footage here. So these are just some of the Russian vehicles that we have seen destroyed in Thankyou. Of course, the use of reconnaissance drones, direct attack drones as well. Those drones calling in the artillery, and this was spotted and taken there. Now, this is a very important spot for Ukraine, because Ukraine actually do have a small bridgehead over here that could launch more into the Kherson Oblast. Now, crossing Dnipro, crossing rivers in general in this war has not been very successful for Ukraine or Russia. Typically, it sort of all brings in and goes to shit from just the amount of artillery, and everything is just so much surveillance up here. But we do see a lot of small boats moving up and down the Dnipro, a lot of crossings, and we have started seeing some armor. I say some lighter armor pop up on the other side. Could we see a huge Kherson movement through here? Unless the Dnipro freezes, which very unlikely, I don't think that we will here. But something we have seen as well was then Russia's artillery has hit positions in here as well of where Ukraine holds. So we do have some footage of this too. And of course, with all of this, both sides will point at saying that, well, we inflicted way more casualties, they inflicted way more casualties of this particular battle. There's a lot more footage showing, a large Russian loss here. And this is nothing new. In these new offensives we see when Russia first go into an area, the first waves and waves for weeks, sometimes months, we see very large losses before they make really any ground. Now, where we are going to move up into somewhere we're very, very familiar with is just south of Orokhiv, of course, Robotny here. Now, what we have seen near Novopokrovka here is Russia made a very large advancement here. Now, this is where Ukraine had some of its most success on the counter-offensive. So let's look at this sort of region at about, what have I done? About 8.7 kilometers in there. Now, this is today. Let's go back. So this is, of course, this is a pro-Ukrainian map, made a lot of ground right up into there. Now let's look at see what Syriac map says about this. Situation, Russian war, day 654. Zap front, Russian army advanced 900 meters north of Novopokrovka, taking control over a trench area south of Robotny. So of course, this area is actually retaking the positions that Russia lost here. So let's have a look back. So retaking some of these lost positions, but let's try and just measure it. So we're talking just above there through to on this paddock. So, oh, that's not the right one. This one. So we're going to go to here and here. No, that's not right. Wait. So just the center of that paddock. So here to, let's go here. So 2.42 kilometers. Let's just double check that is close enough sort of area. So has made a hell of a lot of ground there in a day. So we're talking, we're talking 10 Ks here and almost a kilometer in a day. So has made a fair bit of more ground there, but haven't seen much change other than that in that area. But there was a large movement. Now, Urzani area, we don't see any change over the last couple of days. All we've seen near Mariinka, as we know, this has basically come under, well, you can't really just occupy rubble, but it's basically come under Russian control here, all but these outer areas sitting in grey zone. But Ukraine can still get a hell of a lot of equipment and resources by these roads into here, so Russia won't be advancing too quickly here. We know they've only made a little bit of ground here in a hell of a, well, in 2 years, because this is since 14, so they launched the offensive, but only made it very only a little bit through Mariinka, and that is absolutely hell from the footage you'll see there. Now let's go to Avdiivka, where we see the main sort of brunt of where Russia is launching its offensive to try and take Avdiivka and swallow it up. And this is very similar to what we have seen then. This is exactly what we saw this time last year then with Bakhmut. So let's just go back a couple of days. Let's go back to the 6th, and we'll be looking near Vesely or Pitny here around, and then we see more ground made up to the north, the northwest, and then a little bit more near then Vesely here. So we are seeing more and more Russian ground made then around Avdiivka. So then we're going to move up to Bakhmut, which everyone is very, very familiar with when we used to do everything about Bakhmut at some points, mainly around Kromove. So let's have a look here. So near Klishkivka, it does show that Russia did expand some of the grey zone there, and to the north of Kromove, pushing down, this was the Road of Lives at one point through Ivanovsky and Kromove here. It does show that Russia did make some more ground up into here. And let's see what then Suryak Maps says about this. Situation north of Bakhmut, Russian army captured the rest of the trenches north of Kromove. In addition, troops continue advancing from many axes, forcing Ukrainian army to withdraw from a series of positions towards more fortified areas adjacent to the road to Chasiv Yar. So let's have a look and actually see if we can line this then up somewhere. So of course we have Kromove here saying that Ukraine had to push back in these areas and that Russia made some ground in here. And similar-ish to what we're seeing on the map, but not exactly. Maybe this will update in a bit, but also, let's bring that back up, further to the north, saying they made more ground, but that's not exactly shown on this map. What we do love, we love when it lines up then perfectly. We're just going to go up to the north a little bit near Vesely here. Now, this is a major advancement here. So we're back on 7th, and I think I last spoke to you the 8th, and then till today through to the 9th, or later on in the 9th, we see this advancement then from the Russians there, a fair bit of ground here. So let's look at this. Situation on the Eastern Front. Russian army made significant advance south of Rozdolivka and southwest of Vesely. A semicircle movement is taking place to force Ukrainian army to withdraw from the last village. So trying to then have a semicircle to force Ukraine out of Vesely and out of Rozdolivka here. So trying to push up, and we can see that movement here. Now, Rozdolivka is, of course, in the grey zone, well, a fair bit, and so is Vesely. So he's continuing that push up through there and has made a fair bit. So let's go from where this is and to just past. So if we can go here to here, let's say a couple of kilometers in the day. So Russia is making a fair bit of ground. And when the War Mapper sort of monthly wrap-ups come, we'll get a better idea of how much has actually been taken over the month of December. Now, I just want to bring you back down to Bakhmut. Now, I can't show this footage here, but I do want to talk about this, and you can see it fully on the Telegram. Just the hell of then Ukraine's 3rd Assault Brigade in Bakhmut here. Of course, this is a German weapon, and as they come out, that's about all I can show. There's a lot of screaming, there's a lot going on, and it just shows the horror of this war and what is actually happening. Now, Kremenar, I had seen that Ukraine made back some ground there, but it's not showing that they have in there, at least on this map. And the rest of the front line, I'm fairly sure, is very stable. Up near, of course, Sinkivka, I believe this is really the most important area for Russia to try and get through Sinkivka and get then in and get Kupiansk. But it's going to move very, very slow in that area. There's a hell of a lot of defense going on through there. But legends, thank you for sticking with me. Thank you for all the support. I really do appreciate it. And I will speak to you tomorrow. Okay, bye-bye.